from 7:30 p.m. as we embark on the most needed quest to remove the tentacles of corruption from our systems. See you then for our latest program called Governance, Corruption, and Justice. And welcome to this week's episode of Governance, Corruption, and Justice. I'm your hostess, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilburg, and tonight we have with us the eloquent Miss Mikaila Prince and the distinguished Mr. Shikema Day. We will be joined by the ever so lovely Mr. Kemol King. And tonight we have a very interesting discussion for you. We're placing the spotlight on local content, but more specifically, the first round of consultations that kicked off yesterday at the Arthur Chung Conference Center. So yesterday we had two reporters on the ground, I believe, Miss Mikaila Prince and Mr. Kemol King. And we're going to get a feel from them about what were some of their observations yesterday at the first round of the consultations. Mr. King is going to join us in a few moments, but in the meantime, we'll start off with Miss Mikaila.
Thank you, Kiana. Yesterday's consultation at the Arthur Chung Convention Center for the draft local content policy was something that we were all looking forward to. It was packed. We saw a lot of people from oil services companies, like one that's owned by Mr. Lars Mangal. We saw people from ExxonMobil Guyana, Hess, CNOC, and so many stakeholders there to give their input on the on that draft policy. So during this 3-hour long consultation, is my mic on? Yeah. Yes. During this consultation, we realized that not a lot of direct targets were given into the aspect of the policy. It seemed as though a lot of people just kind of brushed through it, or like the initial couple pages of it, and didn't fully understand it. So when people were giving their presentations, we heard a lot of generalized input and some of the things that were not exactly related to the policy. So that was one of a disappointing thing that it was disappointing. But we did hear a few good input as well from one person, a chartered accountant, who noted that in the policy it doesn't exactly cater or list chartered accountants as in this policy as an area or an area that these companies can invest in to grow and expand. So that was one key aspect that was shared yesterday. And there was another one, not Mr. Williams, somebody else. I don't remember the other guy. But two very good factors and some consultation that were held yesterday to improve on the policy. So it's going to last for another 29 days, because yesterday was the first. It's supposed to last for a month, and at the end of it, we will get like an overview of what the consultation was like, and that will inform the final product of the policy.
And Mikaila, I can agree with you on some of the input that we saw yesterday on the first consultation, and we do hope that as these conversations get underway, we can see more informed discussions and more informed contributions, because at the end of the day, if we don't have the proper or the kind of local content policy that we want to ensure allows Guyanese to be in the driver's seat of this oil and gas industry, then we are going to be at a disadvantage. And I believe, one of the things that could really help improve the level of conversation that we're having on this policy is basically reading the policy. If you don't know where the document is, you can find it on the website of the Ministry of Natural Resources, and we would implore you, just go on the website, download the document, and check it out. And if you're not interested in perusing a 50-page draft policy, Kaieteur News has been so kind enough to do a synopsis of the policy, the draft policy. It was published in the most recent Sunday publication. This is it here, for those who are seeing it on those who are watching us on Facebook Live. So this is the February 14th, the Valentine's Day edition. And a number of points were raised and pulled out, some of the important aspects. And, I think the discussion could really take the place of looking something like this. One of the points that came out in the draft policy is proposing jobs to be reserved for Guyanese. Now, we have been doing a number of services for many, many years. For example, brokerage services, renting. I know many Guyanese have been in the media and, as you rightly said, accounting services as well. I mean, these are sort of the low-hanging fruits, but the things that we know that Guyanese can produce right away, I think we can compile a list to say, well, listen, Guyanese should be producing this 100% from the jump. And apart from that, we can take the conversation to funding options. And I think that's one of the points that was raised yesterday during the conversation. Many local businesses who would want to jump into the oil and gas sector, how do they get funding? Because at the end of the day, the collateral that you need to give to the commercial banks, it's very, very high. It's stiff. So some countries like Ghana, for example, they've been able to overcome this hurdle by saying, hey, we want to have a fund that the oil companies, whether it's the oil companies alone or the subcontractors, whether it's on a monthly or annual basis, they're going to contribute to this fund. And at the end of it, we're going to have companies who have the capacity or the ability, but just not the funding to be part of the sector, to have access to this fund. And there are rules on how they would be able to be part of this fund and access it. So I think that's one of the ways in which we can begin to enrich the conversation, not just by reading the policy, the draft policy that we have as well, but we can also change the conversation or enrich the conversation by looking at policies that have worked for other countries. And in this regard, I would recommend us looking at the policy that was created for Ghana, because the person who was also instrumental in doing our draft policy did the one for Ghana as well, and that is Mr. Anthony Paul. So I'm not saying that we need to adopt everything from the policy, but we can use it as a guide as to say, well, hey, perhaps this can work, and how do we modify it to suit our Guyana context. So with that, I'd like to say that we've just been joined by the eloquent Mr. Kemol King. He is a very valuable member of our team, and we always love hearing his ideas and his perspectives. So before Kemol came on the program, we were discussing just our observation on the first consultation, the first round that kicked off yesterday at the conference center. So Kemol, we heard from Ms. Prince. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, I went to the first day of the consultation, and
Kemol, I don't think his mic is on. Yeah, okay.
yes, it is. Of course, I didn't expect them to talk about everything because that was just the opening day of the consultation, and this will be going on for a month more. But what I would say personally, my first observation was that there is too much noise sometimes during these consultations, whereby persons just would sit there and heap praise on the government or what they're doing and talking about how much they love them. And we don't need that at this point. It took up too much time when there are many people that would have or should have valid concerns because of the fact that Guyanese have not aptly penetrated this industry yet. So first, I would give an opinion that I'd like to see a little less of that or none of it at all. And of course, the vice president said that during the month of consultations, um, what they would do is break them up into smaller groups so they can get more into the nitty gritty of what people think about the policy. So there's a lot more I wanted to hear, but I recognize that this is only the beginning of the process, so I'll just give it a bit more time.
Okay. So, on that note, Kimal, I would agree with you that indeed the conversation was really taken up too much by praises from several individuals. But I think that if we examine some of the statements made by the Vice President, Dr. Jagdeo, during the consultations, there are really some good points that need to be brought out. And on that note, I'd like to turn to what he would have mentioned about the Center for Local Business Development that was established by ExxonMobil. And this is sort of like the hub where all of the local businesses would go to register. And that is where they get a lot of training on what they need to get done so that they can be able to qualify for contracts from ExxonMobil and its subcontractors. So that's really a portal for all the companies that meet a certain standard. But apart from that, Dr. Jagdia would have mentioned something really important. That business center has about 800 plus companies. It says that. But how much of the money is actually going in terms of procurement and employment? How much money of that is going towards those 800 companies? And I think that's the sort of transparency that we have not seen since the establishment of the center since 2017. Nobody has any idea of the progressive increase of jobs to Guyanese firms, and no one has any idea of the number of Guyanese who would have been employed or would have advanced to senior positions within the various aspects of the operations that ExxonMobil or its subcontractors have going on. And on that note, I'd give Kemol if you want to make an input on
Okay,
that.
I did want to make an input. The vice president talked about people who would give money to certain initiatives or give you a flag figure saying that they're going to spend this amount of $1 million on an issue. And he said that he thinks what happens sometimes is that a significant amount of the funds may just go toward administration. So the people are not necessarily getting the value from the donation or the big fancy figure that you put for PR. And so I think pertinent to this conversation as well is while this local content policy consultation is happening, we also have an initiative that was recently launched by the Stabroek Block co-venturers, ExxonMobil, Hess, and Sinnoh, called the Greater Guyana Initiative. And this is essentially a local content initiative at the value, the company says, of $100 million. And so I think we also need to examine, while we're talking about the consultations, what this initiative entails. And given that ExxonMobil says this center has 800 people, then we really need to take a picture of how much of the industry ExxonMobil has a monopoly over, and whether ExxonMobil is trying to strong arm the development of our policy.
That's a very important point, Kimal. And I think these are the different areas that the local content consultation really needs to look at. The level or the extent to which ExxonMobil's tentacles run through the various areas that we have to address as we seek to put together our local content policy. Because if we're putting together the policy, but ExxonMobil essentially has the control or it's in the driver's seat,
Yes.
then that makes it's just pointless going forward. All that we're doing is just for talking, the talking sake.
Yes.
Now, as we're on that point, and we would have discussed local content in terms of transparency and accountability. Mikaila, I want to ask you, because you have been covering many of the issues in relation to Suriname. If you can just share one example of how Suriname seeks to ensure that its people get the most from the oil and gas sector. What have they done thus far to position its people for success?
Okay, so we have in the petroleum law, Suriname's petroleum law, they explicitly say that you should always purchase our local supplies and products from in Suriname, and the only time that you should be going outside of Suriname is if you can get it at a competitive price or we are not producing it. We have in Suriname as well that where the oil companies have to produce a report about how many the nationalities of their employees, the status in which they work, if it's administrative, if it's technical. We also have cases where you oh God, when you write so many of these stories and you kind of forget them afterwards. There are other cases where well, I'm not sure if it might fall into local content, but they can access the company's oil records anytime they would want to. This is in terms of auditing their costs as compared to the 1 year chance that we have here in Guyana.
Well, I'm not sure if you mentioned, Mikaila, how often do the oil companies have to produce that report on the nationalities of the employees to the government?
Well, that is done every 3 months. So it's a continuous thing, and I think it's the nationalities and the position in which they work in the company.
How would you compare that to, say, how Guyana has been doing in terms of ensuring that Guyanese are employed in its oil industry?
Well, what we have seen continuously from Exxon is a generalized figure of how many Guyanese have been employed in the company. I think it's 50% of their workforce, but we never get the details on it, and it's something that Kaieteur News has been hammering on. Kiana, you would have done, I think, a story a while ago about when we asked for local content, and they said that they were using Maggie's and Cyril's taxi service and Shanta's Puri shop. It's like, and we haven't seen the details of it, but we continuously hear, Guyanese occupy 50% of our workforce. And yes.
Mikaila, that comes back to a very important point that I wanted to ensure we address during this conversation. And even as I say this, for those of you who are listening, this is not just a one-sided conversation. We don't just want you to hear what we have to say. We also want to hear what you're thinking about local content. So feel free to call us. We're here waiting to hear from you. You can get us on 226-7453, or you can send us a text on 6222222. So I'll go to numbers again. You can call us and be part of the conversation by calling 226-7453, or shoot us a message on WhatsApp 6222222. So just to go back to the conversation now, Mikaila, you mentioned something that's very important there about what really hits home to the definition of local content. And that's going to be very important. What will we consider as local content? Will local content be, because I understand that even though we have the targets part of the draft policy says that companies will be asked to meet certain targets. So within 3 to 5 years, you would have to increase your workforce by 30 to 50% using Guyanese. And then for certain areas, you would have up to 10 years to either increase to 70 or 80 or 100% Guyanese. While all of that is well and good, we still have to deal with the fact of what will be considered a local content input. Is it just every dollar that you spend in Guyana? Or will local content be considered anything that is done within the realm of developing the technical capacity of our people, transferring technology for the building of other industries, because it's the vision, as I understand it, of the Ali administration to ensure that the monies that we're getting from the oil and gas sector, it's used to develop sustainable industries like manufacturing, agro-processing, and the other industrial plans that they have. So we really need to ensure that everyone participates, that everyone is comfortable at the end of the day with what we are going to have as our definition for local content. It's going to be so important. And if I'm going to, if I can add, there's one thing that's been nagging me that's absent from this policy, and I read it over about 3 times already. One of the matters that we've had an issue with is the reporting on local content. And I find that in the draft policy that we have, the local content reports of the oil companies, there's no recommendation, there's no provision for these local content reports to be made public, whether it's on a monthly basis or an annual basis. What we have is the companies are going to report to the government, or the companies will report to whoever will be determined as the regulator. And as I understand it from the draft policy, the regulator is going to be the Petroleum Commission whenever it comes on stream. And then there will be several layers for monitoring. But at the end of the day, I still believe that Guyanese should be able to see every single process, every single part. If ExxonMobil says for 2021 or 2022, we're going to do Project A, we should know, well, how many services it will need for Project A, how many Guyanese will be able to access this, what it intends to do to train Guyanese if they're found to be not capable to provide these services, and how do you intend, if you foresee that you're going to have Project A and B next year, how do you intend to prepare Guyanese to fulfill their role for next year? So that's not what we're getting from this policy. That's absent from the policy, actually. So that is actually a recommendation that I would be making quite soon after reading the document and digesting it a little bit more. On ensuring that Guyanese can be able to see every single part, because that's the only way we'll be able to have accountability from beginning to end. So I'll allow if anybody else wants to make a comment.
Well, I wanted to make a comment on something I saw was missing from previous policies, but it was mentioned in this one, and that is the matter of taxes. Well, we have to talk about the fact that the Stabroek Block Production Sharing Agreement grants a blanket waiver to the companies so that they don't have to pay taxes. And our publisher, Mr. Lal, has talked a lot about how it creates an uneven playing field for locals. And we had Mr. Nicholas Boyer, the chair of the Private Sector Commission, who talked about this challenge that he has faced in his own business. He collaborated with a Trinidadian businessman, and they formed a welding and fabrication company to provide for the oil sector. And he said that when he has to compete with another Trinidadian business who has been in it for quite a while, he found that that business did not have to pay the value-added tax because they pointed to the PSA. But he had to absorb the value-added tax into his own margins, but yet provide competitive prices so that he could get the contract. And he also said that the subcontractor that he was applying to, they also refused to pay the value-added tax. So he did not get back what he was paying for. So it's like a dual issue that they're facing. So when this was mentioned, the vice president talked about how there are already mechanisms whereby some of the businesses, once they're located in certain regions, they get tax concessions. And I suppose he's talking about mining. And so he said that this may be something they would consider extending to oil and gas companies.
Well, I think that we definitely need to go beyond considering extending, because if we have blanket concessions given to the subcontractors or the contractors for the subcontractors, I think that in all fairness, Guyanese need to be given the opportunity to be able to compete. I mean, listen, the whole point of a local content policy is to ensure the people have a platform upon which they can stand on to be given first preference so that they can achieve the maximum benefit. This is their resource. And it has to be managed in such a way that they are able to get the first access to, I mean, the prosperity, as was said yesterday. If the prosperity is going to be shared, then we need to have the mechanisms to allow that. And I think access to capital and removing some of these barriers, like the taxes that was mentioned by Mr. Boyer, who's the current chairman for the Private Sector Commission. I think these are really critical issues that the policy definitely needs to address. So hopefully, I mean, Kemol, as you said, this is the first round. Hopefully, when we get the ball rolling on other aspects of this discussion, we are going to see some of these key issues. Provisions addressing some of these key issues can make its way into the draft policy.
So the policy does say, I noticed the drafter inserted that the company should pay their fair share of taxes. So this brings up the issue that this tax administration matter has shed some light onto, and that is the fact that you have to create a policy that gives locals first preference, but you are hamstrung by a PSA that is rigid. It cannot be changed unless the contractors agree to do that. And like the tax administration issue, there are other issues that are solidified within this PSA that cannot be changed. So I guess the government's going to have quite a difficulty navigating its way around this PSA.
Yes, because there is indeed, Kiana, as you rightly mentioned, there is a clash between what this policy is proposing and what the provision actually states in the PSA. And for those of you who might not be aware, there are specific provisions which insulate anyone who's doing work for ExxonMobil from paying any taxes. So they can import stuff once it has to do with the operations of the oil and gas company or the oil sector. They don't have to pay any taxes. Meanwhile, our locals, they would have to pay. So the policy is proposing to make all foreign suppliers either register a company here and make sure that they pay their taxes, or there is some licensing mechanism by which it says that they have to pay once they're doing work here. So indeed, there is going to be some sort of maneuvering, because if you do anything that goes against the contract, there's another provision that says, and this is called the stability clause, the stabilization clause or provision. This aspect clearly says that if you do anything that changes the economics or hampers any aspect of the agreement, then you would have to compensate the company. So it would be it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to be addressed, but it is a bold and a commendable move, because what the previous policy that we have, the January 2020 local content policy that was produced by the APNU AFC administration using Mr. Michael Warner, a a consultant, a well-known person to ExxonMobil, he actually removed provisions which allowed the companies to pay their fair share of taxes. So now they're trying to reinstate it. It's going to be interesting to see how they will deal with whatever legal maneuverings may come from this. So on that note, we'll go to a quick commercial break. When we return, we'll continue the discussion on local content and other matters. So do stay tuned.
Kaieteur Radio, keeping you informed.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Burby's 99.5 FM. Kaieteur Radio.
Welcome to Governance, Corruption, and Justice. I am your hostess, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilburg, and we would have just wrapped up a very interesting conversation on the local content consultations. The first round that concluded yesterday at the Artichang Conference Center, and that would have focused on some of the issues in the draft policy. And if you have not been able to access it, you can visit the website of the Ministry of Natural Resources and download the document, peruse it, and you can make the relevant formal submissions to the Ministry of Natural Resources. So now that we've come to the conclusion of governance, corruption, and justice, we'll now hand the microphone over to Mr. Kemol King, where he will continue the other 30 minutes of tonight's discussion for his show, Petroleum 101. Kemol?
Hi, Kiana. Well, as my show is Petroleum 101, we're also going to continue the conversation on local content.
Okay.
Because it's obviously relevant to both of our subject areas. I wanted to ask Mikaila to talk a little bit about property renting versus buying in the oil industry, because that's something we covered from the consultation at the Artichang Conference Center.
Yes. The Vice President, Mr. Jaguar said yesterday to the president of ExxonMobil Guyana, Mr. Alistair Routledge, that what the government is concerned about at this point is for Exxon, not just Exxon, but all oil companies to rent from local properties instead of buying it, and that way you get a continuous revenue flow in your business instead of just buying it one off and having to own it. In the case of the 10 acres of land that they received at Ogle, where they are set to build their headquarters. And that is something that we have been hammering in the past as well, and it is something that is being done in Trinidad, where they only allow oil companies to rent properties instead of buying it. But what is important to note is that in the accounting procedures in Annex C of the PSA, even if we allow or we mandate Exxon to rent property from us, they can recover it. Yeah. So I really don't see the sense in allowing them to, or we're not getting anything out of it if you already have to recover it in future. So I mean, it's something we have to fix, and it brings you back to the essential issue of everything, the PSA, and how.
How are they going to maneuver that to implement the local content policy?
That is an excellent point that you raised. And I wonder if the vice president is paying attention to these provisions when he's spearheading these consultations. You know, we had asked the vice president, I think on multiple occasions, about the recovery of this or that in the contract. And I was most pleased to hear that when he had a press conference last Tuesday, and we asked him about the point of recovering fines for flaring,
Yes.
he had said that he wouldn't agree that that should be so.
Yes.
So I would wonder whether this could also extend to other things. The vice president has said that there are several aspects of the contract that he is not comfortable with and that he will seek to get certain improvements from. But he had noted that he doesn't want to call it a renegotiation because that's a very controversial term. So they just want to see certain improvements on it. One of the things I also wanted to bring up from this policy that I was pleased to see is something that we had noticed in the policy before that was made by Mr. Warner, and that is the requirement for confidentiality. And unfortunately, those were placed there by this consultant who had been linked to ExxonMobil after the APNUFC government had decided to end their partnership with Mr. Anthony Paul. And thankfully, this government has added Mr. Paul back to that panel. So,
Okay, so Kemol, I know that you would have said on my show, which concluded a few minutes ago, that you really are overhearing the praises and what's not. But I really think that it would be remiss of me to say that this document that we have right now is perhaps the best draft that we've had on local content, because there are so many provisions that are geared towards putting Guyanese first. I mean, there's a lot of room for improvement, don't get me wrong, but it's a far way that we've come from the provisions that were excluded in the beginning. I mean, there's so many different things, and I implore all of you to really peruse this document. And over the next couple of weeks until the end of the consultations, Kaieteur News will be embarking on an informative type of project where we're going to be listing some of the key aspects of the draft policy that we think you need to be aware of. You're going to know where you can find it, where you can make your submissions. And we're basically just going to try to inform you as much as possible about what you need to know and what are some of the options that are available to you. And, you know, Kemol, one of the areas that's really on my mind at this point in time has to do with penalties. There's a lot of debate on whether we should use penalties for noncompliance or try to move away from looking at penalties and do incentives for achieving targets. So, which would work better for Guyana? Do we go the route of doing incentives? And that's something that's absent from the draft policy. And other countries have tried this. So do you get waivers, extra waivers, or do you get write-offs? Or what should incentives look like? Or what should penalties look like? Because at the end of the day, I mean, there is going to be a debate. There is going to be strong opposition if in the implementation of policies. No, not policies. Sorry, penalties. So there really needs to be a discussion on how strict we're going to go, or if we are going to, if we should go that route at all. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do penalties, but there are a lot of options that we still need to consider.
Right off the bat, I would say that incentives would be a better option. And I'd have to pivot back to the PSA making recoverable any sort of charges or levies.
Yeah.
So penalties would be pointless if the oil companies and all of their subcontractors and suppliers and so on know that they can recover everything.
I agree. I agree with that. And, I don't want to seem as though I'm taking over the show because I'm not the host. I'm not the host, guys. And I see someone asking here if Uncle Glenn is on tonight. No, Uncle Glenn is not on this evening. Mr. Lau has his own show tomorrow where you can tune in and listen to him discuss a number of matters in the oil and gas sector. But one of the provisions in the draft policy that I'm really happy about, and I hope that this can be mandated instead of promoted. I really think we need stronger terms for this, and that has to do with promoting joint ventures between locals and foreign companies. And I think that this is an area where we can give incentives to foreign companies for bringing a local company on board, because at the end of the day, this is our industry. And forming those partnerships will help us to, over the years, build that sort of experience that we need. And I think, Kemol and Shikema and Mikaila, in all that we are doing, I think that I really hope that we start to get to the specifics, because a lot of what is missing right now, a lot of what we don't know, a lot of what is still secretive and remains within the Chamber of Secrets at the Center for Local Business Development is what exactly does ExxonMobil need? What do the subcontractors need over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you need in terms of services? What do you need in terms of skill sets? What do you need in terms of technology? Do we have time to say, let's develop four or five hubs where we can have Guyanese trained, and within 5 years, they're the ones who can be able to service this? I mean, even as we are putting together a policy, and the president said this, in the meantime, we need local participation. We definitely need local participation. I have no idea what is stopping any of the authorities of the day from saying, listen, ExxonMobil, you have by the end of the week to submit a list of what you will need, starting with Payara. What skill sets will you need for Payara? What services will you need for Payara? What can we reserve for Guyanese? Why do we have to wait until the end of the policy to do that? Yeah. So I really hope that we can, as we pursue these, ambitious conversations and intellectual conversations about what we want our policy to look like, it really is time for us to get down to the specifics, because while we're doing that, the majority of our business is going elsewhere. And that points to a story that, gosh, I'm sorry for talking so long. That points to a story that I did this evening before coming on the program, and that has to do with our shore base. I mean, guys, you would not believe we are losing billions of dollars. It's going all the way to Trinidad and Tobago because we are not capitalizing on moving and getting the ball rolling on building shore-based facilities. We have CGX who's going to, they're fast tracking their deep water port at Crab Island. But what else? That's not going to solve the problem. ExxonMobil is looking to bring 10 development projects. And right now, we're only thinking about Gisby, which can't even handle Lisa 1. And by the time Lisa 2 and Payara and yellowtail or red tail or some sort of tail comes on board, we're going to need so much more, you know? So I really hope that when we get to this conversation, we start to get down to the specifics and we need to get down to the specifics real fast because we're losing billions of dollars by the day, by the week.
Well, we're not alone in that particular area.
Yeah.
We have our neighbor to the east, Suriname, who is also finding that when it starts to produce oil, it's going to struggle with the need for shore bases. So what has Mr. Elias said about that, Mikaila?
Yes. So, Mr. Elias, during his interview with Kiana on January 4th, he pointed out that Suriname, as it stands, even as Guyana as well, we don't have the capacity to handle all of the traffic that's going to come in from that you need to handle at the shore bases, and he realized this, and they haven't even started producing offshore Suriname as yet, and they won't start until another 2-4 years or so, and he has said, Guyana and Suriname, we should work together in building and constructing our own shore bases so we can handle all of the traffic that's going to come in from offshore. And I think that is an excellent initiative, and it's something that the government should, try to go ahead after, because as it stands, and this was revealed by the former Natural Resources Minister, Mr. Trotman, since 2017 at Gisby, our shore base located at Houston, they don't have the capacity to handle it, and this was since 2017. We weren't producing oil as yet. Imagine what how heavy it is to handle all of that now that we're 1 year after an oil producing nation and just to become two at the end of this year.
I saw someone commented on the Facebook Live earlier that Guyana should partner with Suriname in order to bridge all the gaps we would have in terms of issues like this, shore bases and local content. So before we continue the rest of the conversation, we're just going to go on a small commercial break, and we'll be back with you to conclude the show.
All right, welcome back to Petroleum 101 on Kaieteur Radio. Thanks for staying tuned. If you've just joined us, we were just before we went on our break, we were having a very fruitful discussion on Guyana's local content policy, the draft policy that is consultations are being undertaken at the Arthur Chung Conference Center on this policy. And I know Mr. King and Ms. Mikaila Prince, you were there at the consultation. And notably absent from that consultation the first day was the opposition. And I think that is very concerning because the opposition, the entire opposition, they're supposed to be there to take Guyana's interests at best at heart. And they were not there, they were absent. What comments do you have to make on that?
So there are a few persons that were ministers in the former administration and who were a part of the group of ministers that were responsible for dealing with oil and gas. That would have been the former Minister of Public Infrastructure, Mr. David Patterson, the former Minister of Natural Resources, Mr. Raphael Trotman, and these persons are actually still MPs right now and have taken part in multiple AFC press conferences. But the opposition generally has not, it seems to have not taken an interest in the development of the oil and gas sector since the new government came in. And I'm not sure why. The local content policy is an extremely important initiative that it should be bringing its criticisms to the table about. And I don't want to make the conversation into one where I'm venting or fretting. But the opposition does not have a great record where the topic of local content is concerned. It had hired somebody who we know and respect, Mr. Anthony Paul, and then it removed him and placed an ExxonMobil affiliate there, Dr. Warner. And Kiana has done some great reporting on the conflict of interest that Dr. Warner faced in his position. And in that position, she also reported on the fact that he had removed a lot of the provisions in the policy that would have given Guyana some great protection and would have demanded proper reporting from the oil companies on their local content commitments. And then what Dr. Warner went on to do was put in confidentiality provisions and others that would not have given Guyana apt protection. Mikaila, do you have any comments you want to add?
Yes, just to add to that, the opposition leader, Mr. Joseph Harmon, held a press conference today, his first press conference of the year. And after being absent from yesterday's first consultation on the local content policy, draft local content policy, we would have expected him to say something to address it or to give his critiques on it at that press conference, but we haven't seen or heard anything. Instead, we have heard him criticizing the budget in very generalized and generic ways. Kiana, you can add to that. Sorry, Shikema.
There's a pattern when it comes to
The opposition press conferences, especially those held by the opposition leader. When it comes to matters of Guyana's oil and gas sector, we would have to ask questions. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we would not get any answers on questions that we ask. For example, we had to ask Mr. Harmon about ExxonMobil's flaring, because it's been weeks.
20 days
20
since
days,
Exxon
exactly.
announced their increased flaring, and we haven't heard anything from Mr. Harmon.
And
we
today-
saw one press conference from the AFC, and today when we asked about why we're not hearing anything, he went on to say,
The answer that he gave wasn't anything, because he said, Dr. Vincent Adams already spoke about this and we agree with his position and that's our position. But that does not entirely mean this is coming from the opposition. That was Dr. Vincent Adams' position, not exactly what the opposition is saying. So yes, we haven't seen or heard anything from the opposition relating to the local content policy, and I hope that at his next press conference that he would actually have something to say, something to add, because the opposition plays a very important role in Guyana's government.
Okay.
Well, I think I would amend that to say that they're supposed to play an important role. But you are right, Shikema. The political opposition represents a significant portion of the voting populace, and they have to step up to the plate and do more. An opposition really is important it's a fundamental aspect of any democracy, and we cannot ignore the role that they have to play. And, we can sit here all night and, talk about it, but I think that the opposition is still in perhaps recovery mode from everything that has happened. And it's now the onus is on us, I suppose, to ensure that we bring the facts to the people, ensure that they understand what they have coming from the government and what are the available options to them while still holding the political opposition accountable.
All right, now, it would be a shame if we have local content passed into legislation that the opposition made no inputs.
Yes, it really would be.
All right, now, thank you everyone for joining, all the listeners and viewers on the Facebook Live, and to my panelists, Mikaila, Shikema, and Kiana, for such a great job and valuable inputs into the topic that we're discussing tonight.
And Kemol, before you close, I just want to say this one little thing.
Okay.
Please, guys, I would implore all of you to remember that at the end of the day, this country, its wealth, everything that it has, it belongs to all of us. At the end of the day, it's important for us to engage in civilized discussions, informed discussions and debates, whatever you want to call it, that will speak to the issues that we need to address, but not just the issues that we need to address, but finding the solutions that are key to ensuring prosperity, not just for this generation, but for future generations. We're not going to get anywhere if we're fighting amongst ourselves. So with that, just remember, keep the conversation civil.
All right. Yes, we do, the four of us. Put a lot of effort into fact checking and ensuring that our work demonstrates the integrity and the pride that we place in informing the public and fighting the fight. So, with that, thank you very much again. And please join us again at 7:20 next Tuesday for Kiana's show and at 8 o'clock for mine. Have a good night.
Good night, guys.
Night.